One of the more controversial aspects of Trump's presidency has been his relationship with the mainstream media. It's definitely not a secret that Trump and most of the left-leaning media don't get along too well, to the point where he has even called out CNN for being fake news.
Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
Can you give us a question?
I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir.
I'm changing it from fake news, though.
Doesn't that undermine...
Very fake news.
I know, but aren't you...
Many have criticized Trump for this, claiming that he's going against the First Amendment and trying to silence media that criticizes him. But many people, myself included, think Trump is justified in bashing these media outlets. So first off, I should probably address the bigger concern here. Is Trump attacking the media going against the First Amendment? The answer is no. Calm down. As long as Trump isn't having people arrested for saying things about him, then he's not going against the First Amendment. On the contrary, him calling them out is nothing more than him practicing his own First Amendment rights. However, if there is one thing I would like to criticize the president for, it's the fact that when he calls out the fake news media, he rarely explains why they're fake news. And that's one of the reasons people give him flack for it, because without explaining why outlets like CNN are fake, we're left with the assumption that he just doesn't like them because they don't present him in a positive light. So today we're going to be taking a look at some examples of why CNN is indeed fake news. Pissgate is probably the most well-known and infamous case on this list. It started off with CNN posting a report about an unverified dossier that was later released by BuzzFeed. So in other words, CNN and BuzzFeed reported on an unverified source making absurd allegations about the at-the-time President-elect Donald Trump. And this led to a massive rumor claiming that Russia had information to blackmail Trump with. Sadly enough, this is probably the least fake out of all the news being presented in this video, since CNN and BuzzFeed can still hide behind the fact that they stated the source was unverified. But let's be honest, they knew that people were going to eat this story up. It's pretty well known how widely disliked Trump is, so you can post virtually any negative story on him, and it'll be believed immediately. Which brings me to the next case. On October 3rd, 2016, Trump visited the Retired American Warriors PAC to take questions about how he would use his presidency to support the troops. And during that discussion, one person asked him how he would help with PTSD.
Good morning, Mr. Trump. As you mentioned, there's a tragic suicide epidemic among our veterans, among our military and their families. While the military and VA are working on the problem, their efforts continue to fall short.
When you talk about the mental health problems, when people come back from war and combat and they see things that maybe a lot of the folks in this room have seen many times over, and you're strong and you can handle it, but a lot of people can't handle it. And they see horror stories, they see events that you couldn't see in a movie, nobody would believe it. No, we need a mental health help and medical, and it's one of the things that I think is least addressed, and it's one of the things that I hear, like your question, it's one of the things that I hear the most about when I go around and talk to the veterans. So we're going to have a very, very robust level of performance having to do with mental health. We are losing so many great people that can be taken care of if they have proper care. You know, when you hear the 22 suicides a day, it's a big part of your question, but when you hear the 22 suicides a day, that should never be. That should never be. So we're going to be addressing that very strongly, and the whole mental health issue is going to be a very important issue when I take over, and the VA is going to be fixed in so many ways, but that's going to be one of the ways we're going to help. And that's, in many respects, going to be the number one thing we have to do, because I think it's really been left behind. Okay? Thank you very much.
Now, if you're sane and honest, you see Donald Trump addressing the concerns of military veterans. But if you're CNN, you see Trump calling these soldiers weak, as they promptly posted Trump's statements out of context to make it sound like he was berating the soldiers. The most disgusting thing about this is the way it's set up like they're trying to defend veterans when all they're doing is drawing attention away from the fact that Trump was trying to help them. This is by far one of the most disgusting forms of virtue signaling I've ever seen. And the worst part is it wasn't just CNN doing this. Several media outlets took the same statements out of context in order to paint Trump as the bad guy. And just like the last example, they didn't have to outright lie because they know that their followers don't like Trump to the point where they will believe anything about him at point blank without looking into it. Now we come to this infamous little statement.
Also interesting is, remember, it's illegal to possess these stolen documents. It's different for the media. So everything you learn about this, you're learning from us. And in full disclosure, let's take a look at what is in there and what it means.
Wow, that totally doesn't sound like a desperate ploy to make sure that we can only hear about Wikileaks through your biased lens, CNN. With the first two examples, you could at least argue that it was just yellow journalism or that they were genuinely mistaken, but now we've come to the part where they're outright lying. Washington Post even published an article calling them out on their crap for this. If it wasn't obvious by now, CNN is extremely biased and they're willing to say some pretty stupid things if it suits their agenda. So back in September, a large explosion went off on West 23rd Street. One interesting thing you'll notice is that the media collectively refused to call this a bombing. This was intentional, with their goal being to shame Trump when he inevitably referred to the obvious bombing as a bombing.
I must tell you that just before I got off the plane, a bomb went off in New York, and nobody knows exactly what's going on, but boy, we are living in a time. We better get very tough, folks. We better get very, very tough.
If Trump had claimed that this was the result of Islamic terrorism, that'd be one thing. But the media was so desperate to paint him in a negative light, they all refrained from calling it a bombing just so that they could point at Trump and go, "Look at this guy, jumping to conclusions before the facts come out." Their ludicrous plan might have worked too, if it wasn't for the issue of Hillary calling the event a bombing as well.
I've been briefed about the bombings in New York and New Jersey and the attack in Minnesota.
So what does our good old buddy CNN do when the facts don't align with their narrative? Manipulate them until they do, of course.
There must be a lot of suspicion in your mind, though, about a connection to terror, especially with the bombing in New York the same day.
Oh, of course there are. You know, but again, I think one of the things, and this comes from my background as a prosecutor for 7 years, Jake, you don't want to jump to conclusions, and you don't want to put information out there that you don't know is absolutely true. And so, as I said, we have some promising leads. We're working with the FBI and our state police to follow them. But obviously, if you look at a number of these incidents, you can call them whatever you want. They are terrorism, though. There's no doubt about that. They're terrorism. Now, who's responsible is something else, and what the motive was is something else that hopefully we're going to find out in the days ahead. The fortunate thing here in New Jersey is that no one was injured. The race had not started yet down at the Jersey Shore. And so we're very fortunate that no one was injured here. We pray for those people who were injured in those other attacks.
There is a contrast, I would say, between how you're speaking about it and how Mr. Trump spoke about it yesterday.
So first of all, you'll notice that this guy's going pretty far out on a limb to tie this into Trump. And secondly, what contrast? Your question even stated that the explosion in New York was a bombing.
Especially with the bombing in New York the same day.
And Christie here described it pretty much the same way. He even went a step further and called it an act of terrorism. Pretty much the only difference here is that Christie mentioned the importance to not jump to conclusions that aren't substantiated by evidence. Newsflash, CNN, you don't have to mention that every single time you want to make a very simple conclusion. On top of that, you guys aren't exactly ones to talk when it comes to jumping to conclusions.
He's being criticized for talking about the New York bomb before local officials or local law enforcement had a chance to do so. He told the Colorado Springs crowd that a bomb went off in New York and nobody knows exactly what's going on. That's really just a few minutes after the incident. Now, his opponent tried to draw a contrast. She waited hours later until local officials spoke, and then she said this.
I think it's important to know the facts about any incident like this. I think it's always wiser to wait until you have information before making conclusions.
Several problems here. For starters, Hillary didn't try to draw a contrast. She simply responded to one of your stupid questions.
Secretary, do you have any reaction to the fact that Donald Trump immediately upon taking the stage tonight called the explosion in New York a bomb and pulled that to the ground?
Well, I think it's important to know the facts about any incident like this.
And secondly, even if your obsessively nitpicky criticism towards Trump was valid, guess what? Hillary doesn't stand up to it either, as Matt Christensen demonstrates.
The bomb exploded at about 8:30 Eastern. Trump spoke at about 9:15 Eastern. Hillary spoke before 11:20 Eastern, with video posted at that time by an ABC News reporter, just before Mayor Bill de Blasio offered the substantive pieces of his press conference shortly after.
And Hillary called the event a bombing, which you conveniently left out of your little playback. And even if she had waited for the facts to come out, that still doesn't change the fact that this complaint is absurdly nitpicky, and I'm not the only one that thinks so, as Christie demonstrates.
Well, listen, I don't think you have to defer when saying that there was an explosion and a bomb in New York. I mean, everybody knew that. It was being reported on television, Jake, so there's a difference. Now, you shouldn't attribute it to any particular organization or group if you don't have the facts or information to do that, but I think that what Donald did was perfectly appropriate to tell that group in Colorado Springs that a bomb had exploded. And listen, this is typical Mrs. Clinton. She has absolutely no basis to be critical of what he did yesterday. But since her campaign is only based upon that, that's the only issue she could go to. And it's a shame, but it's because of her type of leadership over the last 8 years, along with the president, that the world is a much more dangerous place.
Pretty much the only thing he's wrong about is this being part of Hillary's campaign. But obviously Christie wouldn't have been able to know that, given CNN's selective editing. And speaking of selective editing, I've talked about Milwaukee on at least a couple occasions, but let's go ahead and recap what actually happened. Now, I may have actually been wrong to label the shooting justified. While it's true that Seville Smith had a stolen gun, there's a possibility that he may have thrown it before he had been fatally shot, in which case the officer may have been in the wrong for shooting him. Unfortunately, all we have to go on is a criminal complaint filed against the officer by someone who has seen the body cam footage. Additionally, the officer has apparently blocked the footage from being released to the public, so what we know about it is limited to testimony from those who have witnessed it. Regardless of whether or not the shooting was justified though, the riots that erupted afterwards were completely unjustified. White people were beaten up on the streets solely for being white, despite the fact it was a black officer that did the shooting. So you'd think the media would come down on this, but of course they didn't. And out of all of them, CNN's coverage of it was probably the worst.
Smith's family and friends holding a vigil marked by prayers.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done.
With his sister calling for peace.
Don't bring the violence here and the ignorance here.
So it obviously sounds like Seville Smith's sister is calling for peace, until you see the rest of the footage.
Burning down ain't gonna help nothing. Y'all burning down we need in our community. Take that to the suburbs. Burn that down. We need our
Yeah, totally calling for peace. CNN actually ended up releasing an apology for this little incident. Let's go ahead and take a look at it.
An earlier version of this story mischaracterized what the victim's sister was trying to convey.
No, CNN, you didn't mischaracterize what she was trying to say, you outright lied about it. Don't try and pass this off as an accident. You don't edit out context to something like that by mistake.
She was calling for peace in her own community, urging the protesters to go elsewhere.
Now this is a mischaracterization. She didn't simply tell them to go elsewhere, she specifically encouraged them to go elsewhere and burn more crap down. And while you could argue that she was technically calling for peace in her own community, that's like pointing to the fact that Michael Brown was a teenager. It doesn't change what size he was at the time and how much of a threat he was posing. So as you can see here, not only does CNN have a bias, not only will they stretch the truth, but they can and will lie about certain events if they see fit to do so. I'm well aware that mistakes happen, but there's a difference between making a mistake and outright lying. And granted, there are times where it can be difficult to discern, but in the cases of the bombings, Wikileaks, and Milwaukee, you can't simply give CNN the benefit of the doubt. But Brad, don't we need a free and open press? Of course we do. I'm not saying that Trump is a perfect president at all. There are plenty of things to criticize him for. He thinks vaccines cause autism, he refuses to allow recreational marijuana use, and he thinks Edward Snowden is a traitor, despite the fact that all he did was reveal how the government had been acting unconstitutionally. And ironically, if it wasn't for all the secret information that had been revealed about Hillary Clinton, he might not have been elected. I don't have a problem with people criticizing Trump, but in addition to a free press, we also need an honest press, which CNN has proven themselves not to be. And it's not just CNN. NBC and Politico also mischaracterized Trump's quotes about PTSD. And other outlets have also had their own controversies, such as New York Times giving Hillary veto power over their articles. And given the media's propensity to lie and manipulate the facts, I consider Trump's statements that the media is fake news to be relatively fair. So if you want to criticize Trump, that's fine, but understand that his criticisms of the media are far from baseless. And that's pretty much all I have to say on this matter. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.